Hello, and welcome to another North Carolina Botanical Garden Lunchbox talk. We're so glad to have you all here, and I'm excited to celebrate the incredible efforts of our Herbarium team in launching the Flora of the Southeastern U.S. web app, which we'll hear more about shortly. And we are recording this presentation, so if you were registered for the program, you'll receive a link for it afterwards in your inbox. And I'm Joanna Massey-Lalikas. I'm the Director of Learning and Engagement here at the Garden. And I have with me today David Michaud in the back of the room supporting our Zoom audience. So he's going to help the Zoom audience with Q&A. Speaking of, we will take clarifying questions if something's not quite clear to you during the presentation, but most questions we'll want you to hold until the end. And you'll hear that again one more time as we're going through. I'm really excited. We're reaching a really broad audience today, particularly on Zoom. We have folks from Alabama, Delaware, Florida, Georgia, Maryland, Michigan, Mississippi, Missouri, New York, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, Virginia, Washington, and West Virginia. And I may have missed a few who signed up in the last hour or so. So excited to have all of you with us to hear about this great new web app. So the Flora of the Southeast web app is really a game changer for our herbarium. And from a traditional print and PDF floras of the Southeastern US to a searchable online or in your hand opportunity to access so much information about our Southeastern plants. It's really my honor to introduce two of our herbarium staff today who have been leading this effort, both Scott Ward and Michael Lee. Michael Lee is a data scientist at the Botanical Garden, has spent the last 20 years at the intersection of botany, ecology, and information technology. He's the technological architect of the Flora of the Southeast web app. And he developed the Flora Manager database that drives this Flora of the Southeastern United States, which can be customized for flora of other areas. He's an avid mapper and created customized range maps for several plant lists from various areas, AKA floras, as well as tools to allow people to create their own maps at multiple scales. And Michael previously worked in the UNC Plant Ecology Lab as well as NatureServe. Scott Ward is a research botanist at the Botanical Garden working for the Flora of the Southeastern United States team and its associated PDF publications, as well as web and phone applications. He's originally from Western New York and has worked and collected plant specimens across much of Florida and is now extensively exploring North Carolina and other Southeastern United States. He has a degree in plant ecology from SUNY Brockport, where he also worked on a variety of community and wetland ecology projects. Scott also performs research at the NCBG Herbarium, annotating specimens, utilizing specimens for dichotomous key writing, and accessioning many of his botanical collections into the herbarium. And I also want to highlight, before they come to the stage, the work that they're sharing today has also been the product of a lot of work by volunteers, and we really honor the volunteers as well that have worked on this. So thank you. There are some in the room as well. Scott and Michael, please help join me in welcoming them.
Thank you. So we are so excited to have a very full room here at the North Carolina Botanical Garden. And we are also very excited to have a large group of people joining us online. So welcome to all of you online and welcome to all of you in the room. This is going to be kind of an informal talk. We're going to go back and forth, the two of us, as we do up in our office very frequently. And we're also going to go back and forth to you as well. So if something's really not clear, if we've left you a little bit behind, raise your hand if you're in the room or put a comment on Zoom and let us know. And then more substantial sort of discussion questions we'll take at the end. So with that, let's go ahead and start. So the outline of what we're going to do today is all about the flora of the Southeastern United States, the background and the concepts of it. We're going to talk about the print and PDF versions, 30 plus years in the making. And then we're going to transition into how we digitize this flora and made the FSUS web app, made the FloraQuest mobile app, and all the dichotomous keys, the graphic key, and the diagnostic photos and what roles they have. There's going to be time for a phone and web app tutorial at the very end after questions. If you want very step-by-step procedures for how to do things, stick around until after the questions and we'll go through that. And the little bit more higher level stuff will be throughout. And we'll also talk about future directions. So my background, which Joanna has already said, I can't really add any better to that. So I'll just say my career has always been at the intersection of Plants Drive and Data Avenue. And I'm happy to continue that here at the Botanical Garden. I've been here 11 years part-time and then additional 2 years full-time working on the flora, as well as Joanna said, other places in that field. So I'll turn it over to Scott.
Hear me okay? Pretty good? Okay. As Joanna mentioned, I'm originally from Western New York, the Finger Lakes region. This is in the Adirondacks. This picture was taken. Did lots of learning there, really early sort of career botany and community ecology work. Worked and lived sort of on and off for 3 to 4 years in Florida, especially in Central Florida. Explored much of the state and collected quite a bit and learned a ton. And now I'm trying to supplement some of that information into the flora. And now I'm sort of broadly exploring lots of the Southeast from the highs all the way down to the lows. So this is kind of mountains of Virginia on the right, and then sort of Pocosin Sandhill margin and Croatan National Forest in North Carolina. So really grateful to have broad experience in the Eastern US. So we know as botanists that botany education has kind of dwindled over the past few decades. It used to be much more commonplace, a few decades ago, but since then it has decreased in a lot of curricula. Also, this idea of plant blindness has kind of made its way through societies, and we're hoping through a lot of these resources that we can sort of backtrack on some of that. Especially because plant systematics, the study of plant classification, is still on the rise. We're still learning lots of new things every year. And because of this, we want to make this data available. It's a matter of integrating a lot of these new studies, thousands of publications, hundreds of floras into one single document that people can use in the field across the Southeastern US. Especially because botanical knowledge is still in high demand. People still want to know the plants growing either in their backyard or at local parks or even beyond there. And we're still learning very important things about our backyard, so to speak. For instance, 36th recognized biodiversity hotspot in the world is the Southeastern coastal plain. And of course, there's regional and local studies too that are discovering all sorts of interesting botanical finds. We need botanical tools and resources to make these discoveries and to sort of understand what we're looking at. So Flora of the Southeastern United States, or as I'll sort of abbreviate it as FSUS throughout the presentation, has been in the works for over 30 years now. Alan Weekly sort of conceived this idea in the early 90s and has just been plugging away at it since. First sort of formal publication was based on his dissertation work and published in 2005. And this mainly covered Virginia to Georgia, but primarily the Carolinas. And since then, the flora has grown even further in its geographic scope and taxonomic scope and covers more than 10,000 species as of 2023 across 26 states. So the Southeastern Flora team is large when we talk about the contributions that many collaborators have made to the keys in particular, but the sort of core team that is working on some of the products we're going to talk in depth about today consists of Alan Weekly. Katie Gibson is our collaborator, our app developer. Chris Ludwig does provides a lot of assistance on the data side of things, especially with the graphic key that we'll talk about. And then of course, Michael and myself. And Michael and Katie really help us immensely with the data side of things and getting this botanical information onto platforms that are usable and efficient. Of course, as I mentioned, the Southeastern Flora team consists of many collaborators. Here are just a few people who have contributed some of the dichotomous keys. And if you're uncertain what a dichotomous key is, you'll see in a little bit in this presentation. Some people have contributed on maybe just one genus or family, others quite a few. So we're very grateful for their contributions and collaborations. So when I say a flora, we're talking about this document that is a technical publication. It is a publication, and it's used to describe and provide tools and guidance to ID all of the plant species that occur across this 26-state area. And that's native and non-native plants, plants growing spontaneously or wild, right? Growing there, not necessarily just cultivated, but we do have some plants that were originally cultivated and have now started to naturalize in this area. So as of the 2023 Flora, which was released more or less May 1st, I know it says April 14th there, but May 1st was a big date for us this spring, consists of over 2,000 pages, and at this point, almost 11,000 species. So its scope is very broad. And as we moved a little bit towards the southwestern edge of things, we have lots of work to do, lots of species to add that we'll talk about a little bit in a second. You can see some of this, some more about this research on the North Carolina Botanical Garden webpage. If you go to the right and click on research, you can click on either the Flora and Plant ID apps or the UNCCH Herbarium to learn a little bit more about these resources. Just to reiterate, the Flora covers about 26 states, 18 of them completely. And it covers across those 7 physiographic regions, from the highest to high in the mountains to the lowest to low, and even some subtropical areas in South Florida. And of course, Michael has come up with some really innovative ways to make ID more efficient in some of these areas. So there are derivative floras available in each of these states, so that you have, a lot less options to deal with when you're trying to make plant identification. So at the regional and whole Southeastern Flora wide, there's a lot of scope covered as far as plants and geography, elevation as well, and climate.
All right, so a little intro on the FSIS web app. It's available now at fsis.ncbg.unc.edu, and you can find that on the North Carolina Botanical Garden website under Research and UNC Herbarium. Floras is one of the places, and this is one of the types of floras. There's over 10,000 searchable taxa there. And you can search not just by species name, but you can also search by family, by genus, by species, by habitat. If you're interested in species that occur in a certain type of habitat, like a marsh or a woodland, you can search by those habitat as well as by family or genus. And then once you get into the main meat of the web app, you'll see distribution maps, diagnostic photographs, all the synonymy, older names that were used for species, habitat descriptions, phenology, when something's flowering or fruiting, as well as these dichotomous keys that we will get around to talking about. For the FSIS FloraQuest mobile app, just a brief introduction. What is it? We have now the FloraQuest Northern Tier, and we'll talk about that range, but it's Kentucky and Virginia northward in that map that you saw just before. And this is available for Android and iOS mobile devices, both phones and tablets. FloraQuest works entirely offline. So if you're out in the field somewhere and doing some ID or looking at something, you don't need to wait for an internet connection. You don't need to look up even the images that way. It's all on your phone and ready to go. As in the FSIS web app, you have all those distribution maps and photographs, the synonymy, habitat, phenology, and dichotomous keys. All of that's included as well. And in addition, there's a graphic key that we're going to talk about, a different type of way of keying out plants. And that can even switch back into a dichotomous key at the end of that process. There's a large glossary of all the botanical terms. So when you're looking at a term and you're not sure what it is, you very quickly can see the definition. And as well, FloraQuest allows you to do on-the-fly geographic filtering. So with the PDFs, you can get the filter just set down to one state. In FloraQuest, you can set it to a particular state or 2 states or a particular region within a state. And we'll show you how to do that in a minute. So there are 3 major formats that we are supporting at the same time for the Flora. There's the PDF Flora, and that is a large document up to 2,100 pages or so for the full area. It's smaller for the individual states. That's one option. There's different advantages to it. It's just there. You don't have to rely on any sort of technology other than just the screen. You could print it out if you wanted to, or portions of it that are of interest. Then there's the EFSA's web app. That has all the same information in the PDF Flora, but you're using a website to interact with it and an internet connection if you have that. Then you have FloraQuest, which you need the internet to download it, but once you have it, you don't need the internet anymore, and you can work through it that way. So one of our, Carol Ann McCormick says, we want to put the hay where the horses can get it. This is an example. Different people will prefer different versions of this. And we've literally gotten emails from people saying, I don't really want to see the Flora in this format. The only way I want to see it is in a printed version. And other people say, I don't want to see it in the PDF version. The only way I want to see it is in a web app that's searchable. So of course, different people are going to prefer different things, right? So we're trying to meet those needs in many different ways at the same time. Back to you.
Okay, so continuing on this sort of process of modernizing the Flora, again, thousands of publications, potentially tens or hundreds of published floras, printed floras, represent so much botanical information that represents decades of discovery, right? Botanists for hundreds of years now have been ascribing names to the things, the species they're seeing. And this data years ago was decided between Michael and Alan Weekly that as a database would be much more useful moving forward, especially as edits are made, new species are described, new ranges are determined for species. So all of this data is integrated into a Flora Manager database system, and then from there can be churned out into the PDF as it has been for years, but now available in 2 other formats digitally. So in the field, no longer having to carry an entire bundle worth of books. Instead, all of this data is available on your phone. And actually, it consists of, again, these collaborations with so many botanists across the region, botanists of various ages as well, and expertise. So what happens is all of these pieces of data are edited or created in the first place, for instance, where a species occurs, if it's endemic or only found in the Southeastern US, whether it's native, common, or rare. All this data gets input into the system, and Michael helps us churn it back out.
All right, so now's a chance where we go into the dichotomous and graphic keys. And these are the 2 icons that we use for each of these in the FloraQuest app. The dichotomous key is the one here on the left with the 2 options, sort of just 2 options, like a bracket you would see like in March Madness. And then the graphic keys is more like a trident where you've got many different choices coming down to one thing. So those two icons are the guide to what we're talking about. The theory behind these is that a traditional dichotomous key is going to be that series of 2 questions, and it's going to keep asking you, or a series of questions with 2 choices. It's going to keep asking you those choices, and you're going to choose the better one. It's a little bit like at the eye doctors, where the eye doctor's saying, is it better A or B, A or B? And you keep trying to decide. And just like at the eye doctors, exactly, this guy's got it right, where it's not always clear, it's not always certain which one is which, but these keys are written, and we'll give an example in just a minute, so that you're first going to work through aspects of plants that are available long-term. So think leaves and shoots, stems, things that are there on the plant for most of the year or all of the year. And things like flowers are going to have at the very end, because there's no option of just sort of skipping the question. You have to answer the question. So that's how we structure those. Graphic keys, however, are interactive and they're unordered, and every question is optional. So if you see something and you say, here's a yellow flower, you can immediately get to the answer in the case there that the only yellow flower listed here is the yellow flower. So one thing could easily lead to an answer, but you could also check a couple of options where there is no answer. So all these different combinations are possible. And so there's different strengths to both. So an example of a dichotomous key, this is a lunchtime example, and we're trying to identify food. And at the first example, it seems kind of silly because it's easy to identify these things. You recognize them. But how would you train somebody? How would you teach them to identify different kinds of food who had never seen any food before? Well, you might ask them, is the food sweet or is it savory? And this is how we read the key. Both sides of the couplet, both number 1 key leads, are considered by you, and they're not together because whichever one you decide, you move to the questions right below that. So if number 1, food is sweet, you would move to number 2 below it. If you said number 1, it's food is savory, you would go to number 4 below the second option. So let's say it's sweet. So we get to the sweet food, and then the next question is the food cold, served cold, or is it served at room temperature or hot? If it's cold, it can only be ice cream. That's the only thing here. And maybe this wasn't a good idea because we're probably all getting a little bit more hungry. I know I am. So if the food is served room temperature or hot, then we go to leads 3. And my idea for this was pie or cake. And initially I thought this is kind of easy. Pie is something that has dense flour on the bottom, and there's this fruity thing on top. That's easy. And cake is just one layer all the way through. But then I thought, wait a minute, what about those apple pies that have a crust on top? Okay, so I have to kind of modify and say, so there may be a different layer on top. And then cake, I thought about, what about those cakes with like the buttercream filling? You know, that seems to be a different layer, right? So then I had to add some more information in there. It gets very complicated to try to communicate these things to people, how exactly you would do it. So this is one of the things with dichotomous keys, because you're only giving 2 choices. If food were selected to be savory, we'd go on to number 4. And then I've said, is the food served at breakfast? Well, then that would be eggs. And is the food served at lunch? Well, it's a sandwich. But this is not an ideal question, because what if you just see the food and you don't know when it's being served? You just found, you know, the people next door who had food brought in. We don't know when it's being served. So that's not a very good question. So that's another thing about the keys, is we want to write them in a way that is easy for people to determine just with material and not something that they can't see. And Scott and Alan in particular are amazing at writing these keys, and it's very, very difficult to do. And the other question is, what if you get pancakes with bacon? Well, if you said that was sweet, it might be called cake. And if it was savory, it might be called eggs. But both are wrong, although they're kind of right too. So if you start adding new things to the key, just 1 or 2 new things, you can probably make it work. But once you start adding 5 or 6 or 7 new things, then you might have to throw the whole key out and start again. So this is very challenging work. These guys do amazing work at, and they come up with these keys and they work, and it's phenomenal.
And of course, think about this whole meal, but instead there's 10,000 items that you're eating, and you're classifying and guiding people to identify the food, right? So it can get really complicated once you add in a lot of these new items.
Exactly, 10,000. That's like feeding the teenagers in my house. So an example of a graphic key with the same type of thing. So here we have different choices. It's the same kinds of things that I was just writing on the same screen, but you would just check what you saw. And if you said, oh, it's cold, well, we know it's ice cream. That was the only option. So even with just one piece of information, we're already there. Or you might say it's hot, and it's savory, and it's 3 layers, and it's served at lunch. My layer question was divided or aimed at getting the difference between the pie and the cake, but here it works out because that's a sandwich, but it does have 3 layers. Well, it could be lasagna. Lasagna, you've broken my key again.
But
so
lasagna may not occur right at that table. It may only.
That's right. Lasagna occurs in a different region, the Italian region. So we could say something sweet, and it's served at breakfast, in which case we get nothing. We get no sweet breakfast because there was not an option on our list of foods that was sweet at breakfast. Clearly, this key doesn't know about cinnamon rolls. So in this case, we might have to look and say, well, maybe it's not sweet, or maybe it was served really late in the morning, and that's actually breakfast, or that's actually lunch. So this requires a lot more information. You have to answer every possible question about every possible food or plant. So that gets very, very complicated, and there's a lot of data there. So that's also part of the reason why we introduced the FloraQuest app for the northern region. Not quite so many species to start with all at once, but there's a lot more data here. Is cake served at breakfast? That's my final comment for this particular set of slides. Okay, so we're modernizing the Flora. We're making the FloraQuest phone app here, mobile app. And we're using this northern region as the area of in question. Just the colorful shaded areas, the northern bits of Illinois and Indiana are not included, just the places that are filled in with color. And so with these fewer plants, there's fewer choices for us to make in both the dichotomous keys and the graphic key, as well as just browsing through things, and that makes it simpler. When you get into FloraQuest, when you download it, and you can get to it through that link at the website to go to research and then apps, and there's a big black button to download on Android or iOS. When you open it up, you can start off by finding at the very bottom, there's a bottom menu bar that will take you to either browsing plants. The leftmost screen there will just show you the list of plants with images of each, and their common names and things like that. You can go to the graphic key, the second option with that same trident icon that I was talking about earlier. Then there's the dichotomous keys with the two choices icon. And then there's more, the ... with lots of other functions that we'll talk about. So that's the beginning of FloraQuest. Browsing plants, there is a sorting by option with the 3 lines of different links at the top. So you can browse by common names if you prefer, or scientific names. You can go with genus or family. And then by using the little gear icon in the upper right, you can select which states or regions within states, the coastal plain of Delaware, the Piedmont of Delaware, that you would like to turn on at the moment or turn off. And then when we filter by geography, we get fewer plants. And the fewer plants we have, the easier it is to navigate keys, the easier it is to find what we're looking for, unless a plant is where it's not supposed to be. So you can turn those back off if you're finding something that doesn't really match, and maybe you'll find a state record. So in browsing plants, here we can browse by genus, for example. Here, somebody's searched for Desmodium, and we're filtered to the Virginia Piedmont. And there's a little blue icon, a blue text string there that says Virginia Piedmont there to let you know you're only seeing Desmodium in this area. So if you're looking for something that's not in Virginia, you won't find it. And you can click that and change it if you're looking for something that's not listed. So this gives us a very manageable list of species instead of everything that could occur in the Flora region. There's also in the configuration section a download extra images toggle. And this is about 500 extra megabytes of space. If you have that on your phone, you might want to turn it on and you pull all those extra images in. The first couple of images for each plant, 2 or 3, maybe 4, are included in the download. But the extra ones beyond that, you can either access with an internet connection if you have one, or you can download these ahead of time. So it's up to you whether if you have a lot of space on your phone, you're going to use this all the time, I'd encourage you to do it. Okay, so when we're browsing plants, eventually we're gonna mash one, as people like to say. You mash a plant and you get there, and there's 3 different screens that you're gonna see about on the species page. The first one, using that bottom bar to navigate, is the images, and you can scroll up and down and see 3, 4, sometimes more than that, images of the plant. And here's where a lot of our volunteers, some of whom are in this room right now, have gone through and they've said, here's a good leaf image of this plant. Here's a good flower. Here's a good stem. Here's a good picture that shows the hairiness of the stem. And so in that way, we've been able to go through and show a lot of different kinds of pictures for each plant. So you're not just seeing a bunch of leaf pictures or a bunch of flower pictures, you're getting all the different parts of the plant. Thank you to those volunteers. And then on the middle tab is the description of the species. Here you're getting the distribution of the sort of text word phrase about where the plant can be found, the phenology, when it flowers and when it fruits, if that's applicable, the habitat and status of the plants, and the synonymy, the old names that they went by. You can click dichotomous key to see where this plant was found in a dichotomous key, so we're going backwards into that key. And you can also see all the different characters for the graphic key, and you can tap each one to translate what it means. So if you're not sure exactly what that flower means, you can tap it and find out. We're talking about dichotomous wildflowers. And then there's a ruler in case some of those characteristics, or in other places in the app, you'll need a ruler to measure something, and you can tap that and a ruler will appear to scale. Note that it is not to scale on the giant projector screen here. Don't bring a plant up and try to measure it, but on your phone, it will be to scale. Then you can also use the range map that will show the map of where this plant occurs and what its status is in those places. And there's a legend to what the different symbols mean. And we'll go over that in a minute as well. Okay, so here's an example of looking at the dichotomous keys and the graphic keys on the screen at the same time. And once you get through the dichotomous key, you'd find a species and go to its description that I just mentioned. And then once you get through the graphic key, you'll see a set of plants, maybe one, but maybe a set of plants that match those characters. And we'll go through that in more detail too. On the dichotomous keys page, you will see sometimes you can link back to these from a species to see where that species is found. And when you're in them, you can navigate sort of backwards to where you came from. So if, for example, in this one, you were working through key D or key K, and then got to Desmodium and you didn't like the answers you're getting to, you could click the little key K up in blue at the very top here and go back to that key and navigate back through to find maybe what answer you wanted. And also notice that all the botanical terms are in blue. If you click those terms, the definition pops up, and that's illustrated in the lower right here. So all of those terms, it's just a sea of blue terms that all have definitions embedded in them. So that's super handy if you're a newer botanist or even a more experienced one in remembering what all these things mean. Okay, Scott's going to go into the graphic key now.
Okay, so here's a nice example. This is a plant that does grow in the carnivorous beds in front of Totten Center at North Carolina Botanical Garden. So let's say you're seeing this orchid in the field and you're unsure what the name is. I'm sure there's quite a few people right now tuning in that already know it, but I'll go through the example nonetheless. So on the bottom menu, you'll see second from the left, the graphic key option, that left-facing bracket. If you are unsure how some of the groups play out, the sort of 10 to 12 groups, depending on the region, you can go up to the begin button and you can scroll through the groups that we have separated in the graphic key. Chris has done a really good job here of helping users of all skill sets understand how these groups kind of compare and differ. If you are pretty sure you know the group, you say, okay, I'm pretty sure this is an orchid. I feel confident enough. It's not a grass. It's not a woody shrub. You can just go right to the skip button and it'll bring you to the graphic key starting menu. From there at the top, you can see these plant groups are right here laid out with these icons. And then once you pick your group, I can't see it unless you're on that screen. Okay, that's fine. Once you go through the group, you can start to make decisions afterwards. And again, as Michael has stated, you don't necessarily have to make every single decision, right? If you're unsure if maybe a plant is native or non-native, or you don't know, you can't say for certain if you remember if it was in full sun or partial shade, you can just skip those questions as opposed to the dichotomous keys where some of those early decisions at the beginning of the keys are crucial in getting to those lower steps.
And we're going to go into this in a lot of detail after questions and everything. We'll go step by step through the graphic key. So if you're not quite sure what's going on there and how to interact with all the different buttons, a lot of detail coming later at the end of the presentation.
And what's great there, right above that widest arrow, you'll see you can use your location, which will narrow down your options based upon your geography as well. So in this case, I've gone through this example. I've selected my plant group as orchids. It's growing in wet soils. The light regime is full sun. It's often in habitats with full sun. It's flowering in June. The flower color is pink. So every time I do that, at the very top here, you can see how the number will narrow down from potentially hundreds or thousands down to, in this case, 8. So pretty great that I've taken the whole family of orchids, which can be quite diverse in parts of the Southeast, and narrow it down to a lot lower options to make an identification. Again, they're sorted by commonness and rarity. So at the top, Calopogon tuberosus, common grass pink comes up. And at the bottom, you're much less likely to see showy lady slipper, Cypripedium reginae, in the south. That's a little bit more common as you get further north in the eastern US. So once you get to these last 8 options, you feel free to scroll through and see how the pictures look, see how it compares to your material. Or if you want a slightly more advanced approach, we have this option that's still a little bit in development, but represents a really exciting opportunity for use in this app, where you can then convert those 8 options back to a dichotomous key and use some botanical terminology to try to figure out what you're looking at. So instead of just clicking on the graphic key options, which is really useful, this is a way that we can sort of teach a lot of people that maybe don't go towards the dichotomous key initially how to use that feature. So once I click on that, identify further with our instant key, it then converts those 8 options into a key, and you can look at the plant in the field or wherever you may be and make the best decisions based upon the evidence available. So in this case, when this plant is flowering, the leaves are present. So I can click on 1B where it says choose this lead at the bottom. And then once I click on 1B, it will then automatically gray out options that we don't need to make decisions on because the other genera or species that would have been in 10A are no longer chosen, right, for this based upon the dichotomous keys. So it brings you to the options you need to make decisions on no matter what. And then from this case, very simple decision you have to make: is the leaf solitary? Is there only one leaf on the plant? Or are there two or many leaves on this plant? So in this case, we'll choose leaves 2, which this species often has. And then from there, we're down to our final option. So again, with dichotomous keys, you make one decision at each step of the way. And then eventually you want to get to this last choice where you can make one decision on what you're looking at. And it's asking us if the lip, which if you click on it, it would describe it as this modified structure on the flowers of orchids. In some cases, many of them highly advanced and pretty neat looking. It's asking you if this lip is inflated or if it's not inflated. So you can see on this species, it's kind of anvil shaped on the bottom, but certainly not inflated like Cypripedium or lady slippers above. And then from there, we can say, oh yeah, that does look just like the species I'm looking at, Calopogon tuberosus. And sometimes there's multiple species in a genus, but oftentimes where you are based on your geography, you're really only down to one or maybe a few options, which is really helpful. One thing that's going to revolutionize a lot of these keys is putting really useful images and illustrations to some of these complex botanical terms. So not everyone necessarily knows what peltate scales are on the leaves, but Kathy Garnis has really helped us to get some of her really great illustrations into the graphic key and eventually dichotomous keys as well, so that users will better understand the botanical characters used to identify these plants. Things like one of my favorite families, Cyperaceae, some of these characters like Akene and Aperiginium or Akene with or without bristles become a lot clearer once you see these really simple illustrations. So we're really grateful for Kathy for this ongoing work she's doing for us. Some terms, you know, some groups, right, are kind of scary to people. They don't necessarily want to learn them because it can be kind of intense, but once we have really useful illustrations, again, we're sort of dissolving some of that confusion. So in this case, we're just asking how the main blade of the fern is dissected. Is it simple or is it tripinnate in some cases? And now we have some great illustrations to accompany that. So as we move forward, we're looking to fill more and more of those gaps with better illustrations and in many cases, images. So just to move on from the graphic key in the phone app to the web app, again, this is the website you can go to navigate to a lot of these pages. If you're looking on the home page, you'll see in the top left corner, in this case, Michael Lee was signed in, so it'll show you if you're signed in and register on the site, which is very simple to do. You can click on those 3 bars and it gives you some options. I'll show you in a second to customize your web page. But if you just like to search by the family or species or habitat, you can see on the left in the middle there, there's where you will type the species name in. And you can also see we have a little bit of information about the phone app and links if you'd like to download and purchase those apps. In this case, the northern tier. And then again, a map of the area. And then scrolling down, there's a nice poster outlining sort of the vision of the Southeastern Flora team. Again, you can search for a family, genus, or species. And for diverse groups like Carex now, you can search by section. You can look for habitat range maps and other really crucial identification notes in some cases. And then, of course, you can scroll through the 20,000 plus now images that sort of continue to grow for each species page. Again, big thanks to a lot of our volunteers, which help us to annotate a lot of those images, and that work is ongoing. You can also navigate to the dichotomous keys, which Michael showed earlier. And then basically it has almost all the same features of the PDF, but just in quicker form. We have, although we show about 20,000+ photos on the species pages, we have almost 200,000 images sitting in the database for almost all of the species present in the flora. We're really thankful for about 65 botanists in particular who have helped us to fill in almost all of our gaps as far as at least a single image per species. And there's a list of some of those botanists right below. And of course, we've also pulled from really useful databases like iNaturalist. And we have about very small contributions in many cases, maybe just one species, but over 1,000 contributors from that platform. Again, our volunteers helped us to annotate almost 60,000 or make over about 60,000 annotations across almost 9,000 species, which is pretty substantial if you think about it. But we still have some gaps that we're looking to fill, and we're having some photographers right now help fill some of those gaps, especially on the western edge like Texas. Of course, still some species may only have one image or no images at all, and you'll see this message at the bottom of the screen saying, we still don't have any images of Tridents ambiguous. If you have any, you can click on this link and it'll bring you to our WeTransfer site. Again, some of these images are really great because they were taken with great resolution on high quality cameras. And so we can actually blow those images. We can click on the original image link and it will blow the image up. We can zoom in a little bit and look for some of those really diagnostic features. In this case, Amelanchier arborea has kind of hairy calices, or the outer layer of the flower, which can be quite diagnostic when identifying it. You won't see this little warning at the bottom, but you will see the photographer's name below the image. In this case, some person named Scott G. Ward. And then what's really nice, this is a great feature if you're looking to learn groups more in depth, learn about the diversity of different groups. And you can do this again at the species, genus, or family level. So we've selected what we call our flagship photo, sort of the single best representative photo for a species or a genus or a family. And then we like to show all the various diversity of forms within those groups as well. So you can sort of see the typical look of maybe an aster here with Herbarium, but then from there, you can start to see all the various forms, growth forms, sizes, colors, and shapes within one of the largest family, actually the largest family in the world, Asteraceae, right? To the right, you see Euphorbiaceae, another very diverse group, and you can see the diversity of forms as well with those. And then one of my favorite genera, Rhynchospora, on the right here, you can see some of the really diagnostic features like the achenes that we use to make identifications, and all the various shapes and colors and sizes, bless you, of those in that genus. And again, you'll see on those blue links below the references on the far right, you can see how Rhynchospora is keyed in the flora, how you can get to it and separate it from other sedges. And you can also see all of the children or species below that level. We call it children because it's not always necessarily species. If you're at the family level, the children would be the genus, the genera, and then so on and so forth down to sometimes variety or subspecies. On the web app, again, with these 3 bars at the top, you can customize your web page. I often prefer using the dark mode here in the middle. You can also do just regular light mode if you prefer the white background. And what's great is in the search bar for really optimized searching, Michael has created this feature where you can search by the first 2 or 3 letters within the genus and species name. So for Acer rubrum, I can type in ACRU or ACERUB, probably a hit with birders in particular. Again, this is a really useful tool if you want to do a quick search and maybe look at some images of a species and see how it's keyed, a couple quick minutes in the field and figure out if that's what you're actually looking at. And then again, we'll talk about in a second, we're supplementing more of our images with contributions from botanists all across the region. And you can easily create a login name at the top and then use the upload function, which we'll show at the end of the presentation here. So in this case, if I want to look for Georgia aster, I can just type in SYMGEO, and it's the only species that has those 3-letter codes for the genus and species. So it automatically pulls up Symphiatricum georgianum, and I can scroll down and read all sorts of interesting information about that species.
Okay, so if you're searching for one of these species in the web app, the initial view, if you just have one species that matches what you're searching for, it'll show you the detail of that. If you don't, you'll see a list. And so here is a list of all the different maples. So this is an example where I just searched by a common name. And sometimes you'll get things you weren't necessarily looking for. If you do those 2-digit codes, 2-letter codes of 2 letters of genus and 2 letters of species, you might get something that has part of that sequence in its name. That's okay. You can get a set of results. Some of them will be relevant to you and some less so. You'll have the scientific name, which you can click to get more detail. The common name is also listed. And then the first image, that flagship image that Scott was just mentioning, is also shown. Then we show you for families and genera and species a detail page for the taxon. So taxon is just that sort of overarching term that means family or genus or species, subspecies, et cetera. It's shorter than saying all that. So the family is listed in each of these. Then you can see the key, if it's a genus or family, you can see the key that breaks up that family or genus into component genera or species. You can see a description. You can see identification notes, usually at the genus or family level. And then you can also see references that those books that Scott was just talking about, or those published articles that that went into saying how these things were keyed out and which species were legitimate. Then for the species level, you'll get all those sorts of things. You'll get the scientific name, the section, if there's sections to the genus, and then you'll see the phenology when something's flowering or fruiting. You'll see the habitat, the distribution, and where it's native to, or if it's endemic to our region, as well as the synonymy. You can then also map back and forth between these. So if you're in a species page, you can jump back up to the genus. If you're in a genus or family page, you can jump down to the children. And you can see the map of distribution and plant images we've been talking about. The distribution map is the same across all of our different products. So the web app, the FloraQuest mobile app, and the PDF all have the same type of maps. They're very small maps in the PDF, and they're much larger and they're zoomable in the web app and in the FloraQuest mobile app. So a square always means it's native to that particular region. So in this case, we've got whatever this is native to most of the Southeast. The triangle means it's non-native. And if you've got sharp eyes, you may have seen just up in the very southern part of Kansas, this thing is non-native there. That means it was native to presumably Oklahoma, and it has then now been introduced or is expanded by human activity and is not native, but is growing in the wild in Kansas. If it's a diamond, it means it's maybe native. It's not clear whether it's native or exotic. These things, the plants don't tell us whether native, exotic all the time, and so we don't always know. Filled in, if the shape is filled in, that means it's common in that location. If there's a dot inside a shape, that means it's uncommon. If it's hollow, that means it's rare. And if it's an asterisk, again, down in South Texas here, we have just one asterisk. That means this is a waif. It's rarer than rare. It's an exotic that is not really persisting very much. You're very unlikely to find it. And if you want to hover over a symbol in the web app, you'll see what the definition of it is and what the region is called. And there's also a legend in the FloraQuest app below the map, below each map, and as well on the footer of each page in the PDF. And so here's an example of how to deal with keys. And I'll go through this quickly, but basically what you want to do is you can click a key lead once to show both sides of both couplets in the lead. So number one, if I click that, it'll highlight both of the number ones. If I click number 3 on this particular key, the second part of lead number 3 is pretty far down. There's a lot in between them. So I can just click that number 3 again, and it will compress the key to just number 3. Then I can click 3 again and uncompress it, bring it back to where it was. We have sections in Carex. If you look at the genus Carex, all the sections will be listed, and you can click each of those to get just a list of all the sedges that are in that section, as well as their image. So that's a helpful way of going through the sections. And I see Scott was supposed to tell you about that, but I did. So I'll let him continue.
Just forget everything you said. No. So this is the most diverse genus in North America. There's about 600 species in North America alone, about 2,000 worldwide. So it's a really intense genus to learn if you're starting from zero. So one thing that botanists have done over time is created these sections of morphologically similar species. So feel free to peruse those a little bit more on the main Carex page on the FSIS webpage and learn a little bit more about that genus. So looking sort of forward to the future of the FSIS and its products, we're going to continue to create these derivative floras or florulettes at the state and regional level. We're thinking about various ways that we could create more customized options or features on the web app, maybe a membership-based subscription. So you can customize your own flora, let's say for your backyard, for instance. There'll be 4 more phone apps that are to be released after the Northern Tier was released on May 1st. The next one up is North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. And we're hoping by the end of this year or early next that app can be out. And then 3 more apps to follow after that. So lots of opportunity to customize with these phone apps, and stay tuned for that constant sort of evolution of these products. One major project we're thinking about putting a fair amount of effort into is illustrating keys. So having diagnostic photos and illustrations to accompany some of those difficult groups so that we can learn those groups better. And then one thing we're really hoping for too is a sort of strategic photo upload. Now that Michael has created an upload feature on the FSIS webpage where users can help us to fill in some photo gaps. You can do this by, once you've created your account, up in the top left, you can see I'm signed in there in this case. You can then upload the photo, and if you have the photo labeled as a species name, it will auto-populate it. If it doesn't match completely, you'll see a little red check mark, and you'll need to update that name. Sometimes species are only labeled as species, and then you can choose the variety or subspecies based upon what's in the database. So Michael set it up where the names are have to be a one-to-one match to the flora. We're really looking to fill some very sort of small remaining specific gaps with high quality diagnostic and of course accurate and confident, the user's confident in the identification of that species. So, you know, help us help everyone by contributing. And there's the link below if you'd like to navigate to that website after you've created your username. This could really be a serious game changer. This is a very simple example of Sericocarpus in the aster family, but one of the characters to separate in couplet 1 is whether the leaf has teeth or not, or whether it's entire or no teeth on the leaf. So again, real game changer potentially. This is where this is what the phone app covers currently, and then the gray area is what will be released soon after. Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
So we want to add one thing about the fact that a lot of this stuff, it takes a lot of money to do this. So the app development is in general not cheap. We've built on previous apps that our developers worked on, so we've really been efficient in our funding there. But we are very committed to making the Flora available in many formats, most of it completely free. All the PDFs are free. The web app is free, and the FloraQuest mobile app does cost about $20. $19.99. And we just want to be clear that we are not using any federal or state funds to develop this. This is entirely funded with private donations, donations from people such as yourselves who have seen the wisdom and the value to this and decided to contribute toward it. So we just want to make clear that that is part of the opportunity here. And we think that trying to recover some of the costs of development and creating sustainable income source is part of how we sustain this product. We are running low on time, so we're going to zoom through the last couple of things here. So feel free to continue to support this work in whatever way you see fit, or on this link below, you can request a Flora and donate at the bottom of the page. Also, let us know some feedback, hopefully constructive, emailing flora@office.unc.edu. You can share photos of plants using that upload option on the last slide. And we just wanted to say, Alan Weekly and the entire Southeastern Flora team remain diligent in synthesizing all of the current taxonomic and botanical information available today into a suite of these Flora products that are constantly evolving. We're grateful for your support, collaborations, feedback, and of course, friendships. So thank you. And at this point, we can take some questions.
Great, thank you, Scott and Michael. Thank you so much. That was great. So glad to know more details about the app and the website and all of the good stuff. So we have a few minutes here. We can take some questions from in the room. We have a couple of questions online. So if you want to think about if you have a question in the room, I'll go to David first.
And we are going to be doing a more in detail step by step after the questions. So if you have another few minutes and you want to see more details step by step how to go through all these keys, hang around for just a little longer. If you need to go, that's fine too.
I'll run back up.
So your phenology assessment of the plants, is that based on their phenology within the tier, for example, the northern tier, or is that the full range of the species?
That's a really, really good question. For really widespread species, you'll see in some cases like red maple, the phenology is kind of broad because in areas of South Florida, red maple might start blooming in December and January, and not until maybe June or May in high elevation areas. So it's a hard question to answer entirely for the whole flora. We've had discussions about customizing that for region, and we'd like to definitely modify that over time, but currently it's broadly across much of the Southeast.
So if somebody is purchasing the app today and they're in North Carolina, but North Carolina officially hasn't been released yet, how relevant is it to them?
So 97% of common plants in North Carolina are going to be in the app. So very, very relevant. So of course, Virginia is not far away. And unless you're down in pretty far south, the coastal plain area or sandhills or something, finding some pretty unusual stuff, you're going to be able to use it just great right here. So that's a fantastic question. Thanks.
And again, we're hoping to have the next app out by the end of this year or early next.
Great. Any questions in the room? I'm on my way with the microphone.
To upload a photograph, is an iPhone sufficient?
Yeah, an iPhone is totally sufficient. Although we sort of prefer higher quality DSLR camera quality photos just because it gives us better resolution. In some cases, if we're completely lacking images and an iPhone image is the only one available, yes, we certainly encourage it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
David has another one from Zoom.
Will you in the future distinguish the ecotone area taxonomies?
So do they mean at the habitat level or? So an ecotone is typically this convergence where two habitats meet, but it can also potentially refer to variation. I think that's an ecocline in how a species looks across its range. So I'm not entirely certain what specifically they're asking about, but if they're discussing possible variation in a species across its range, that's something we've talked about a lot because species definitely can vary, especially depending upon the environment or region they're in. Right now, the core team working on the app, the 5 of us, we do have a lot of work that we're trying to churn out with limited sort of time and resources. So that's something that's kind of a customization that we discuss maybe a little bit down the line, especially, just descriptions of species as well. Do you have anything to add, Michael?
So whoever that is online, thank you. And you can follow up with us either at the email we listed or on the chat if you can help us answer that a little easier.
I have one more question here in the room, and then it's about time to close.
This is a quick question. Will you be including any of your botanical illustrations in addition to your photographs?
Oh yeah. So once Kathy finishes those icons once we are set on the icon she's created, rather, we have access to use that illustration in many formats. So right now it's currently just being produced for the app, and we still have some icons to finalize. Some of them are still in draft form, but once they are created, we'd like to use them across the web app, the phone app, and maybe integration into some smaller PDFs as well. So yeah, we're hoping to use them in a variety of ways.
I have one last question online. I have the Flora Quest now. Are the other apps to be released later additive, or will they be separate?
Yeah, I'll let Michael.
Right now, they're separate iOS or Google apps, completely separate. We're not sure if we can have an app that will contain all of the information. We're just not sure if the data structure on the phone will run it efficiently. The app developer who's familiar with this, already the Northern Tier was pushing the number of species that she thought would be able to go in. And so far it goes in great. If we can add new regions into other apps, we're going to look into that. But right now, we're not sure if technically it can be done. And right now the plan is to have just separate apps, at least to start with.
But yeah, that's a great question. Something we've discussed quite a bit. So thanks.
All right. Thank you both so much. And thank you all for being here, both in person and in Zoom. We look forward to seeing you again in August for our next Lunchbox talk. which will talk about a Master Naturalist program happening in the area. So join us for that. And for folks, if you're not a member of the North Carolina Botanical Garden, please consider joining. It's a way that we can continue to do the great work that you heard about today. So thank you all and see you soon.
So we do want to continue with this overtime encore for anybody who wants to stay. We'll give people a chance to leave, and you're not being rude if they're leaving. But I did have people ask me specifically, can you show me exactly how to use the app and exactly the buttons to press and all that kind of stuff? So if we can keep doing that and keep doing the Zoom, I think we can. We're going to do that if anybody's interested. If everybody leaves, then we won't. But feel free to go. And thank you for coming, everybody. Really appreciate it. Be in touch with us if we can help answer further questions. But it looks like we've got at least a core group here and probably some people online sticking around. So this is what I'm calling the encore, overtime, extra innings. How are we gonna key out a wildflower? Just show me for a very detailed way how we do this in the FSUS web app, how we do this in the FloraQuest dichotomous keys, and how we do this in the FloraQuest graphic key. So the plant in question is gonna be this lovely pinky purple flowered thing that probably a lot of you notice what it is. And this is one that we picked from our courtyard garden. And we're going to key it out and just show you how it works. So to start with the FSUS web app keying example here, we're going to start with a key to keys. And that is one of the links that is available under links and examples on the, it's not going the right direction to get over there.
See, yeah, bottom right of the.
So it's in red and highlighted there on the homepage of the FSUS web app. So if you know your family or genus, which you might in this case, you can search for that family or genus, as I have done in the corner. And then once you get to that genus or family page, you can go directly to the key there. So a quick note, there is no graphic key in the web app. That's only in FloraQuest, the mobile app. So once I click key to keys, now I get at the very, very, very top of all plants, how are we going to sort through these? And again, so Alan and Scott and others have had to write these in a way where you're getting from basically, I have a plant to the specific plant with only questions that you can answer either choice 1 or choice 2. So the first question is this plant minute, consisting of filaments or thalli, undifferentiated into leaves, etc. You can kind of scroll, you can kind of fast forward and you can look and say, this is going to send us to key A1, pteridophytes reduced to thalloid or filamentous free living gametophytes. Probably that's not what we have here. So we're moving on to the second part of number 1, plant more complex with stems or rhizomes, leaves, roots, and the leaves generally more than 1 cell thick. So even if we don't understand all the bits of the first option there, we can kind of understand that's what we're looking at. More than 1 cell thick, leaves, shoots, etc. That's what we've got. So again, with the dichotomous key, if there's an answer there, if there's a blue link in the web app, or if there's a ... a name of something in the PDF, or in FloraQuest, if there's a choose this genus, then you go there and off you go. Otherwise, then if there's no choice here, there's no blue answer that we're getting to or another key, then we go and look at the next 2 options. So after I do that, now I'm looking at, well, okay, so I didn't do every single step, but now we're looking at, is this plant a floating aquatic or is it terrestrial, wetland, or aquatic normally rooted in the substrate as opposed to floating? So again, these are really high level questions, and you can kind of read from the right-hand side of the menu too, where you're sort of saying, well, what am I looking for generally? Where is this going to go? Am I going to look at herbaceous dicots, key O, with alternate compound leaves? No, this is not that. And you can scroll down and see, oh, okay, we've got herbaceous dicots. Well, in this case, I, for example, showed just the flowers. That's what we were focused on. But now it's asking me questions about leaves. I wasn't paying any attention to the leaves. So what's happening with the leaves? This is one of the great reasons why it's nice to have your device with you in the field where you are. So if you have an internet connection, you can use the web app. If you've got FloraQuest, you can use that anywhere. So if it's going to ask you questions, and eventually it's going to ask us questions about like how the plant roots. If we didn't take the whole plant or we didn't look at that rooting, we can't answer that question. So here we can zoom in and see the leaves are arranged in an alternate or opposite leaf arrangement, I'm saying the exact wrong thing. And there are no serrations, there's no teeth on the leaf margins. Leaf margins are just the edge of that leaf blade. The leaves are simple, they're not compound. So it's not one leaf that's broken into separate pieces. It's just one simple leaf. So using that information, armed with that, I can answer in key S, that we're looking at the leaves are unlobed or the leaves are palmately or pinnately lobed. No, it's not the second one, it's the first one. Then I go off into key S1 is where that takes me to.
Now, just a reminder real quick too, on that last slide, one of the things that confused me first when I was learning dichotomous keys is that sometimes both options are true for your species. So let's say in this instance, this species on the stem has leaves that are opposite and alternate. You would follow both of those paths. And when we structure keys, we have to make sure you can get to that answer both ways. So don't be confused if if the same identical answer can be reached at two separate dichotomous key splits. Just a reminder, some of this is kind of basic botany as well, but Michael's doing a good job about sort of laying it out. So
yeah, there may be more than one way to get to a species. Absolutely. So I get to a section where it's asking me about number 3, is the ovary inferior or partially inferior? And then the second choice is really far down. So that's a case where I would click that number 3 and compress the lead and see that the other choice is the ovary superior. And if I'm looking at that flower and I'm looking at where the ovary is relative to the rest of the flower, it's up higher in the flower, it's superior. So I'm going to select that option. Here's where it would be really nice to get that glossary embedded into the web app. And that's something that we do aim to do. And so you could click that and get a definition in case you didn't know about that. And then so you continue through the key. This is the key getting through from families into genera. It talks about the perianth. Is it a single whorl with petals absent, or is it a perianth with 2 whorls, petals and sepals both present? And so I have determined that second one. Then we're looking at the symmetry of the flower. Then we're looking at whether or not it's 1 pistil or 2. And then we're looking at whether the ovary and capsule are 3 to 5 carpellate or not. And then there's 5 sepals, 5 of those pretty flower things there that look like petals, but they're sepals apparently. And then the last 2 is looking at whether or not the inflorescence is a terminal cyme or it's this salver form, which is one of these funny words where a salver is this like tray thing, but botanists use that to describe something, but nobody uses salvers anymore. So that'd be a great term to be able to click and define. But now we've gotten down to where we've gotten to phlox, our genus.
So yeah, so again, like it's hard to sum up a lot of the terminology and knowledge that goes into this, but this is to show that you can reach things at the genus or species level from the very beginning. And it just requires a little bit of research and sort of delving into some of those basic botanical terms. You know, we don't necessarily have the time to go through the difference between sepals and petals and the whole whirl of a flower and different groups of plants, but this is at least to illustrate that these things can be reached this way.
And this is also the most difficult way to reach the answer here because we are not filtering down to any species, to any geography. So this is all 10,000 plus species being thrown at us here. So all the questions are still on the table, but you go through these one by one and you pick the better option. And like Scott was saying, sometimes you look at a plant and it looks like most of the leaves are opposite, but a few are kind of a little bit alternate. So you're going to look at sort of the majority form of the plant, try that out. And if that doesn't work, you might go back and try the other one. So we've reached a genus now. When I get to that phlox, I click the previous link. I clicked the phlox down at the bottom, and that's going to take me to the genus page. So here I can see all about the genus phlox, the references, the description of where it is, the range map. And so if I'm looking at a range map and there's no North Carolina and I'm in North Carolina, there's no North Carolina for this one, then I would say, well, maybe I made a mistake somewhere. I need to go back. But here, phlox is everywhere. So we're in good shape. The pictures here, though not all of them looking exactly like our image from the beginning, it's encouraging that we're on the same lines with what we were aiming to describe. And once we get to phlox, there's 5 decisions, and I'm emphasizing there's 5 decisions that we have to make here to get to the species. Are the stems herbaceous? Is the style long? And then it asks about rhizomes, about whether this is a sort of cloning type thing or if it's just shoots coming straight out of the ground. And so that's where if I hadn't, if I wasn't still in front of that plant, I didn't really look at the roots and how the shoots were coming out of the ground. And then the leaf margin is ciliate / cerulate, and there's a corolla tube present, When I go through all those steps, then I get to Phlox paniculata, and I can click that link, and I can see the exact flowers that, not the exact same plant, but it's going to look exactly like it. So that's the hardest step, to go through the entire flora, and that's using the web app. It would be the same in the PDF, the full PDF. If I'm doing this in FloraQuest, we're going to go through the exact same process, but use FloraQuest. And the first thing we're going to do in FloraQuest is set up that geographic key, geographic filtering, to make this easier. So you can get to that in two different ways. On the left-hand screen here, there's the gear icon under Browse Plants, as well as there's a message telling you what your filter is currently. Right now it says Virginia Piedmont, but for this example, I'm going to pretend that I'm in the Maryland Coastal Plain. So if I don't want to see and have my filter turned on to Virginia Piedmont, I can click that, or I can click the gear icon. Then I can go over to the app configuration. This is where we set up the geographic filtering. We can either look at a list of states and turn one state on or off, or however many we want, or we can select subregion and go down to the specific subregion. If I just scroll through, I can find the Maryland Coastal Plain and select that one and turn off the Virginia Piedmont. So now I'm in the Maryland Coastal Plain, and the next screens will show me the Maryland Coastal Plain filter is on. Again, when I go to the dichotomous key, I have a choice. I can either start with that master key, the key to keys, or key of keys, as it's called sometimes in this app. Or if I want to kind of read from the right-hand side like we were doing before, I could click major plant groups, and that will show all of those keys that are not a key to the entire set of flora or a key to a family or genus, but instead are these like key P, herbaceous dicots with alternate simple leaves on the stem. So once you find the sort of general category, you can zoom straight to that major plant group key, and you can start there instead of saying, is this a minute little thalloid filamentous that thing? Or
So this illustrates really nice on the right here that this is a good way to broadly learn the diversity of the flora. So we can think about these large botanical characters and how things are separated. Again, not all the time today to go into all these, but this is a really good way. Instead of just getting a quick answer, you can actually understand some of these major differences that we use to categorize plants.
And if you're wanting to see the genera, you can go to a genus just through the browse option. You can find a species and then go up to the genus. But under the browse and FloraQuest, the genera and families aren't listed there as their own entities. So an easy way to get to the dichotomous key there is just go to this dichotomous keys section. Then you can search whether you want the main key to keys, or a major group plant group key, or a family key, or a genera key, genus key. In this case, you could do any of those. And so I've illustrated the different choices you have here. We're going to start with the master key. So the same thing we did before in the web app. So I'm going through the same set of choices, only you'll notice, just like with the instant key, certain choices are grayed out for me. So it didn't ask me the first question about, is this plant minute, or is it like a plant with cells greater than one cell thick? So that's because in the particular region that I'm in, that's already been excluded. So we don't have to worry about certain questions. So it's making it easier for us. So now I just go straight to floating aquatics versus plant terrestrial, wetland or aquatic normally rooted. It's the same question we had before, but there's fewer of them. So then I'm selecting 2B, 3B, 15B, 16B, the same choices I had before, but there's a little bit fewer of them. Again, if I'm not sure about one of these blue terms is, botanical terms is, I can click it and a definition pops up. That's not the same definition as on that screen, but I just grabbed the screenshot from another part of the presentation in case you're like, wait a minute, where'd that come from? So I continue to move through the same questions. And if ever I want to see the whole set of couplets, I can click that show all couplets, and then I can go back and see the other couplets that have been grayed out for this purpose. I continue through. I'm saying plants are reproducing by seeds, not spores. The plant is terrestrial. It's not epiphytic. It's not growing on another plant. It's a dicot, not a monocot. The dicots have netted veins. The monocots have all parallel veins. And then the leaves are not strictly basal. They're calling. There's leaves on the stem. Those are the ones that I was showing you that were opposite. Continue through, opposite or whorled. Not whorled, actually opposite, simple leaves, and I get to that same key S that I was in before. So we got to the same place, but it looks a little different, and there's fewer choices because I've done that geographic filtering. And I'm going to again choose leaves are unlobed, and to get to key S1. And from S1, I'm going to start going through the same process. The Flora Quest has, you'll see these little messages, C11 taxa in 3A, C40 taxa in 3B. It has kind of like a crystal ball of like looking forward. If you choose this, what is in your future? And so if I want to, if I'm not, and this is a good way of if you know some plants, you can click that and say, okay, these are the types of plants that are coming later. These are the plants with the inferior ovary or partially inferior. If I know some of these, then I might say, oh yeah, this flower is not like those. It's something different. And so that's a quick way of sort of like fast forwarding in FloraQuest. Because you're usually on a small screen with a phone and you can't like just scroll like you can in the web app on a larger screen or in the PDF. We get to key S1 and we're continuing through that. And if I continue through the same choices we did before, in all of the different pairs of choices, I'm getting to the same as before, where we're going to get to flocks. And here I'm going to click the flocks button, takes me off into the key to flocks. And so here before, there were more options. Here in the coastal plain of Maryland, there's only 2 choices that are needed. It jumps me straight to number 7. Number 1 is skipped. So it's just asking, is the style long or is the style short? And I've determined the style is long. And the other pieces of that I've read and actually looked at, not just the first one. And then it jumps to 10A and 10B, asking about the leaf margin, and I choose 10A. Now it gives me only 11B. There is no 11A. That's not a choice for the Maryland coastal plain. So it's just taken me 2 decisions once I've reached flocks with the geographic filtering turned on in FloraQuest to get to flocks paniculata, which when I click that, we'll see the same pictures that you're going to have on the web app. And then the description and range map will be the same as what we have on the web app. And one of the images here was taken by somebody who was here for this presentation. So again, the teamwork of all the people, the volunteers, the people writing keys, taking pictures is all being shown really nicely here. So two decisions, whereas before we had 5 decisions, some of them a little bit difficult, like especially if I wasn't looking at the roots of the plant and I didn't know how the shoots were going. If I'm in the Maryland coastal plain, I'm okay not knowing what the roots are like in the whole Flora region. That would have caused some trouble. All right, so we're 2/3 the way done with the step-by-step tutorial here, the overtime extra innings. So I don't know, it's like the 14th inning now or something. So again, we're talking about the graphic key now in FloraQuest. So Scott gave us a quick rundown of this. This will be the slower one. So I'm going to choose begin. We're beginning the graphic key. I can get to the graphic key with that second icon on the left, the trident looking one. And I'm going to start scrolling through the different pictures that are available here. And I say, do I have a fern or fern ally? If I want to know more about fern or fern allies, I can scroll left and right, and I can see more text and more images of fern and fern allies to determine maybe this could be a fern or fern ally, but we all know it's not. So I scroll down and I look at the next one, grass-like plants. Nope. And I keep going. Orchids and other non-graminoid monocots. Don't think so. Wildflowers, dicots. Okay, this is looking more like what we've got here. And then the different pieces of that are described, and I can swipe left and right to see more examples. And then if I want to, I can keep scrolling further and say, no, it's not a woody plant. It's a little bit like when you're calling one of those places and it's like, press 1 for this thing, press 2 for this thing. Sometimes you're pretty sure it's number 3, but you can go ahead and listen to number 4 and 5 just to make sure. And as you use this more and more, you'll know, okay, I've got an herbaceous, I've got a wildflower dicot. So you click that. And it brings me to another screen of pictures saying you might have a composite or an aster. That's the same thing, 2 words for the same thing. Or you might have other dicots. And so again, you can scroll left and right and find more about what those different things are and whether or not you have one or the other. Since we have flowers, we're pretty sure we don't have an aster. It doesn't look like a dandelion or brown-eyed Susan. And I just want to highlight too that if you click the eye in the upper right of any of these, that'll show the photo attribution. It'll show what the species is and who took the picture. So that's always nice to know. Okay, and then so that was the slow way to get into the graphic key, where I've gone through the different groups and I've chosen other dicots, and I've got 1,103 species available to me, which is a lot, but we're going to narrow it down. So the first thing we can do is we can press our location to select. If you filter down to just one geographic region, you're already going to be filtered down to those species. If you're filtered to a larger region with multiple states or regions within states, you can press. It's kind of a long press, this one. It's not just a quick tap. It won't do anything. You kind of press a long press, It'll bring up a list of the different places that you can select and you say which one you're in. You can also use use my location, and your phone's GPS will tell the app where you are and it'll fill it in. So that's kind of a nice way to do it, very quick. And if you're near some boundary or whatever, probably if you're near a boundary, you don't have to worry too much because it's unlikely that your plant's only going to be on one side of the boundary, not the other, but maybe. But so you can just click one, check one, or you can leave the location filter off if you're not sure. So here is an example of what the moisture regime box looks like before I've clicked anything. It just says moisture regime, and it has 4 options. Once I click one of them, I'm in a dry place. I'm right over there in the courtyard gardens. I'm in a dry place. Now it says in a dry place. You can see the difference between the leftmost screen and the middle screen. It says in a dry place, and then it gives a little definition. Soils without noticeable moisture. Yes, the other day it definitely was. And then the same thing with light regime. I can click light regime in full sun, plant are in an area that receives full sun for much of the day. Now I'm down to 776 species. So we've eliminated about 30% of what we had. And then I continue down. The next thing is the flowering period. It's June, it's flowering. So I clicked June. Now this is something you'll never see in a dichotomous key. I think never. It'll never ask, is it flowering in June? Or is it flowering in July or later? It'll never say that because that's just too narrow. But because of the power of having these little computers in our pockets, we can use this information in a way that we would never use in a dichotomous key. So it's June. Its habit is erect. It's growing straight out of the ground. It's not trailing or growing on something else. The stem characteristics, it's glabrous or smooth. And there's opposite leaves. And as I click more and more of these things, now we're down to 105 choices. So you're just whittling it down and down. I didn't put a little red box around it, but there's a little magic wand in the upper right corner here. And if you click that, it'll tell you of the remaining plants in your group that you have left, it would be most helpful to answer these 2 or 3 things. So it'll help you know, like, because it could be that you could go to the next one and you could say, the flowering symmetry is regular, and it could go down, nothing. That's not a very helpful way. But in this case, answering leaf type is simple. It's not that compound leaf, but it's just one main leaf on a stem. And then the leaf shape, we have different lengths of shapes. Is it very long and skinny, or is it intermediate, or is it pretty fat and wide? Just using that, again, is not always going to be something that will be in a dichotomous key. It might be, but we have that kind of level of information for all these plants, all 6,000 in the Northeastern region, about. And then the flower symmetry is a regular symmetry. It's not bilateral, like a person is bilateral symmetric. This is a radial symmetry. And the flower color is pink. And once I've done that, I've gotten down to 17 possible plants left. So that's pretty good, starting at what we're at, over 1,000. 1,100 down to 17. So we've really come down a long way. And then once I click show in the upper right-hand corner, it'll show me all the plants that are available. Scott showed you earlier the instant key that you can get. That is technically feasible when there's about 10 plants or fewer left. So if you had like 200 plants, to generate a key on the fly is just more than your phone can kind of deal with. So once you get down to 10, you can get that instant key. If it's more than that, then you can just scroll through and start looking. And for a lot of cases, that's more than enough to identify what the plant is, because we have those images and we have the list of plants that are there. Again, the most common plants in that region that you're in are listed first, and their little slider bar at the top in that most green option. And the less green is uncommon, and the yellow is rare, and then the oranges is those waifs that you're really unlikely to encounter unless you're something really weird. So that top green, these first 4 options are definitely the more likely to be the ones that I'm seeing here. And sure enough, that second one looks exactly like the one that I was looking at. So I can click that and see all the information about it and feel pretty confident that's my plant.
So if you want to understand these plants, this is a really good avenue. It takes more time and patience, but it helps you to understand all the concepts that go into botanical classification. There's no reason why you can't also use apps like Seek and iNaturalist in concert with these. We're hopefully in a few months we'll have more in-depth discussions about links to those apps through our app. But for the most part, the real goal of the Southeastern Flora team is to help you to understand why you're making this decision instead of just pointing and shooting and getting an answer. So this is a really good way to understand how these groups are separate.
Right. So you start seeing not just plants, but you start, not just leaves, but you see how they're attached to the plant. Are they opposite? Are they alternate? Are they whorled? Is this one leaf or is it just one leaflet in a compound leaf? Those sorts of things. The goal is to sort of teach this kind of stuff. We got a question in the back. Yeah, go ahead, Milo.
Is number of lobes or petals somewhere? Because that
Yeah.
would get you away from phlox to rexia or that sort of thing.
Yeah, so the major groups like herbaceous dicots would include flowers in parts of 4 and 5. And as far as it's not always flower like morosity, flower number. In this case, we use flower, symmetry. So it won't always be there. Some characters we'd love to add, but some characters we just have as more basic. Yep.
So it's a good question. And the answer is, if we want to add another character like that, we have to answer it for all 11,000 species in there. So we do want to do that. We need to add a few more, we think. And so now we're in the process of trying to identify what new characteristics do we add to try to break down the groups where we have too many of the same thing, where you're going to get too many of the same choice. And then what can we add to help break the logjam there? But you have to be very careful about which things you add because it takes a lot of time to do that. We had another question here. Let me bring the mic to you. So are there still people online? Great, so they can hear.
Just both of them. Okay, just building on the comment you made about interfacing with other apps.
Yeah.
I'm guessing one thing that I would start using is I'm working with iNaturalist or FloraQuest, and I look at and I get a hit and I think that doesn't seem right. Sometimes you
Right.
just know it's not right,
Right.
that those apps are not right. And then you could flip over to this one and go through the keying process, or how would you suggest we use this
both.
app
Yeah.
for verification of something that doesn't feel right in the field?
Exactly. Yeah. And there's a lot more ways to get to your answer nowadays, right? And I think as far as efficiency goes, if you're really uncertain about a group, sometimes I'm like, I have no idea what family or group this could be in, but I'll go through the graphic key because it takes so many options and at least narrows it down a little bit. And then I can scroll a little bit and say, okay, it's certainly not this group, but it makes more sense as this group. So I'd recommend, if you're really, if you're in the gray, you're unsure, and Seek or iNaturalist or some other app is not helping, then going back to this graphic key and reading about the groups and seeing what group it could potentially be in, and then from there trying to narrow it down. Yep.
Great question.
Any other? Yep.
Let me bring the mic so people online can hear.
Eventually, you're gonna have everything and we don't have to have the internet, right, on that app. So, my problem with Seek and all is if I don't have good internet connection,
Right.
it doesn't help you at all.
Yeah,
But
you'll have
your
to-
stuff will be in there, right, eventually.
Right. This is an app you can use completely remotely without any connectivity.
Already, it's that way already.
Yep.
You can use the app without an internet connection.
Yep.
You'll have all the information.
Yep.
Anything else? Thank you all for, one more. Yeah.
So if we already have FloraQuest on our phone, then because this one is only what you've got now, which is now also on my phone.
Old one.
Should we just delete the old ones or just wait until the new regional ones come out? What's recommended?
So that's great. Can I show I'll just put this up in front of the camera so people can see what we're talking about. Can you see that, Scott? This is the old 2014, 2015 FloraQuest app. Thank you. No, it's great.
That's
it's wonderful.
great, yeah.
It's I've got it on the iPad upstairs. So that one will continue to work as well as it works now. But if you, for any reason, drop that phone, off a cliff or something, or anything like that, and you will not be able to reinstall it on your phone. So it is now not on the app stores or the Google Play Store. We didn't want to have confusion announcing the new app and then having people grab that one. That's the old one. So it will keep working as long as you have that device and you want to use it. But that information is now about 6 to 8 years old. And so there'll be a lot of updates from it. So if it's still working for you and you still like it, there's a lot of people who for a lot of time in botany have been using something much older than that. So from a digital point of view, it seems old, but we were using Radford from the 60s through the 2000s and beyond, so it's still a lot of good information in there. And it has a little bit of a different interface and way of working than the new one. If you prefer it and you want to use it, that's fine. But it is sort of like it's a dead end road there. It's just not going to last forever. So the new FloraQuest is on the whole much, much better, has many more functions and functionality. All the photos and stuff are way more robust. And the graphic key component is entirely new. So yeah, keep using it if it's working for you. Otherwise, the new one is the one that's gonna be what you use.
Okay.
The new
It's 500 to 600,
500 to 600 megabytes.
up to 700 or something like that. So it's less than an audiobook, I think Chris found. And then you can download the image package as well, which will add on, I guess, another 500 megabytes or so.
Right. So it runs pretty well on my 6-year-old iPhone SE. So we've designed it to work without requiring a ton of space and a ton of power. So I think most people should have enough space for it, unless they have a really old phone or it's really full of a lot of stuff, which is a ongoing issue with phones. But good question, how much space it takes up. We can get a more exact number, or it'll also be on the App Store or Play Store. It'll say that is there as well.
Okay. So yeah, if you have any more questions, feel free to reach out to that Flora email originally in the presentation. Otherwise, we're going to probably wrap things up here. Thanks again, Joanne and David, for staying a little extra longer. And people who stayed on Zoom as well. We appreciate your interest in the Flora products.
Yeah, thanks everybody who stayed for extra innings.
Yep.
It was a lot of fun. So
Okay.
let us know if you have anything else, by that email or after.
Okay. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.